So I started actually doing this when going like for 13, Next.js 13, but I actually ended up doing it on 14, which doesn't make a lot of difference. It actually, there is not a lot of things. Like I changed it and actually it's not covered in this session. So it's funny. Yeah, but like it's 14 now, not 13. So that being said, my name is Abdelrhman. If you don't know me, you can call me Abdel if you haven't talked to me before. Today, I'm going to be talking about Next.js and slash React 18. It's like our hidden soldier here. And before we start, I'd like to just say a few things. First of all, I'm not an expert, just something that I've been working with for a while, and that's also might be a good idea to share with everyone. So I'm pretty sure a lot of the people who are attending actually know more. And this takes us to the second point that I want to have this session as a collaborative session. So if you have a question, feel free to stop me, raise your hand, or just cut me off and start talking if you feel like you know better or there's something that I'm saying that doesn't make sense. And the third part is that, yeah, I just said this. This says Next.js, but actually it's mostly React 18, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. That like most of the Next.js features, especially the one that came out in 13, are actually React 18 features, not Next.js features, and we can actually use those with different frameworks, like Flux, for example. Just when React 18 came out, they started doing some of the full stack stuff. And simply Create React App didn't support this. So they started actually having these kind of APIs shared with the framework owners. And then it actually ended up coming as part of like Next.js, Flux, and I think some more, but I'm pretty sure Next.js is the one that supports everything, maybe Flux. And yeah, so can you wanna say something? Right. So I shared those earlier today, just stuff that I'm going to be talking about, mentioning like a couple of times, and it actually might make sense if you read about them a little bit ahead. So if you are watching this recording or if you have some time after, please go ahead and read about those. You don't have to be like an expert in those. You just need to understand what they mean and how they work. Just an overview would be fine. And first important point here is server-side rendering. And why that is because it's very important to understand how components behave on the server and the client, because we're going to be talking about this today. And yeah, like server components and client components and all of these kind of rely on server-side rendering. And the next part is suspense and React Lazy. Suspense is basically lazy loading. And it's a very important piece on how Next.js built their app router, which what we are going to be talking about mostly today. Streaming, server-side rendering, and selective hydration. These are good to know things, but I think they are important to really understand how Next.js works, because it's kind of how it's working since React 18 came out. And it has a lot of improvement, performance improvement. It really makes the performance better and experience better. And if you don't understand how this works, you're gonna actually run into issues that you don't get how this is happening. So you're gonna end up spending a lot of time debugging stuff that you should be knowing before you actually start. And with that being said, I'm gonna start by talking about the Next.js App Directory. I'm gonna pause here for a second just if someone had a question or if there's anything that doesn't make sense or if anyone wanna add something. All right, so today is gonna be like a mix of slides and code, actually mostly code, not slides. So I prepared a little bit of a demo and then I'm gonna be jumping back and forth. And if someone comes up with a question and we want to try it, we can actually start coding and see how it goes. But since we only have 1 hour, so I'm going to try to make it short. All right. So a little bit about routing and how routing works. This is not specific to Next.js. This is just if you want to create a router. So basically, you have a route that consists like two main parts, right? The route layout or the layouts, that's anything outside of the router outlet. And then you have the router outlet that if you change pages, you would expect the route layout to stay exactly the same. Like the state is preserved and everything is exactly the same. It doesn't get re-rendered. But this part is actually gets swapped to the new page. But then you have nested routes where inside of this page, like inside of this part, inside of the outlet part, you actually have two places, like the layout and then another outlet. So here, it follows the same pattern, right? If you switch between these pages, then the layout stays the same, and inherently the root layout stays the same, and only this part keeps changing. But how this happened in React in Next.js App Directory routing is that they have a bunch of directories, and then you have reserved file names. So it starts with the app directory, which is basically the root, and then you have some directories starting on that. So if you add a blog, then if you any pages inside the blog, you would write /blog, and then you would get into it. Here it's like blog, and then it has another subfolder that has slug. So it's blog/slug. This slug is going to be like a route parameter. On the other side, it's the same. It's dashboard analytics. So if you want to go to anything inside analytics, it would be /dashboard/analytics. Same for here, /settings, here /settings, /dashboard settings, and then password, and then profile. But the way it actually gets rendered, how Next.js knows what to render is coming from these reserved file names. So every file inside of those folders, they have a bunch of files that have reserved names. If you put this file and then put a React component inside of it, it's going to actually end up having meaning to Next.js. This is a subset of the reserved files. I'm going to start by talking about layout and page. And these are exactly the same as what we were saying here. So the layout is basically this part, and then it takes the children, and then the page is this part. And then this gets rendered inside of that. And this actually gets built like this. So you get the layout and the template, and then you have an error boundary suspense for the loader, and then another error boundary for the not found part, and then you have the page. So all of these 6 files is actually switched into React components that Next.js under the hood builds this React tree and start like taking these components and building them and rendering them for us. All right, so this is for like the root page, right? But what happens for nested layouts? It's basically the same thing, nested routes. It's basically the same thing. You would create another folder inside. So dashboard, you would have a folder called settings, and then you start creating the same exact pages inside. You don't have to like put all of these, but at least you need page.js to for React or for Next.js to say that this is actually a route. But as you can see here, because these are like subset, it actually doesn't render the whole tree. If you go back here, there's like this whole tree, but whatever is there, it's going to get rendered. So here it's going to be the page, the loading part, the error part, and the layout, because these are only 4 files exist. Okay, so what about other files? What if you create some file and something else inside this directory? Next.js is going to ignore it. So you can actually, this allows you to create stuff like components inside the same route. And this would allow you to build like the features module. If you have worked with pages directory, you would see that you actually have to pick components outside of the whole pages directory and then put them somewhere, which makes it kind of hard to maintain if you are working with the Dux approach or the features approach. I'm gonna pause here for a second before I move to the next part. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Right. The next important piece here is server components. And the reason I'm actually jumping into that step before I show you the demo that I'm going to be talking about it kindly into the demo because it's a vital part. So I'm going to like go over it a little bit, and then after the demo, we can actually go back and revisit this part. So what's actually a server component? A server component is basically a component that runs on the server. Right, but isn't this server-side rendering? No, it's because these components run only on the server. What you would expect from a server-side rendered component is that this component is going to be rendered both on the server and then gets added to the bundle and then sent over the wire, and then the client will actually re-render the whole thing. So the whole idea about having server-side rendering is to give the user something to work with until we actually end up having the whole tree and then hydrate it, right? But here it's actually components that we never added to the client bundle. And this allows for a smaller client bundle. So yeah, because these components are actually never bundled to the client component, the client bundle. This allows for a sync await syntax because these are actually wrapped inside suspend. So you can actually do pretty much whatever you want there. They just run as normal JavaScript function. And then you can do like a sync await, you can do data fetching, you can do whatever you want there. And then whatever comes out of this is going to be sent over the wire. So they don't require really hydration because they don't allow you to actually use any React lifecycle hooks, any functions. You can path this kind of stuff, or you can path functions from server component to server component, but not the other way around. So these functions cannot get sent over the wire. So they have no lifecycle, and they never get re-rendered. They render once when you just need them, and then they sent over the wire and then being used inside the client. So the client's actually not aware of the function that was run to get this component out, to get this JavaScript JSX out. All right, so does this mean they don't need JavaScript? No, they actually need JavaScript because what gets sent over the wire is a JSON representation of the JSX that comes out. So this function runs once on the server, gets a bunch of JSX, a string byte into JSON in kind of a format that gets over the wire. This takes us back to the streaming server-side rendering and like the select iteration, and then React on the client side takes this part and then start painting it into the HTML board. So you actually get to have the JSX on the client side. You get to have the JSX part, but not the functions that actually represented the JSX. And that's basically how it looks on the client side. So the client side gets all of the server components tags in JSX format, and then they have the client placeholders that gets rendered after this, because yeah, we're working with streaming, so whatever is ready gets streamed. So you have like a placeholder until the data is ready, and that's where the loading comes into play. All right. So passing data between server and client component. Sorry, but I skipped a little bit part here. What's the difference between a server and a client? So you would expect that a client component is a component that actually runs only on the client, but that's not true because server components and client components are not like the opposite. They behave in a totally different way. The client component is what you would expect from a normal React component. It's components that gets server-side rendered and runs on the client. So it's normally as you would expect from a React component. It's just that server components never runs on the client. Right, so this kind of gets weird when you start composing these together, because you would have to paste the pass data between server components and client components, right? And we said that the server components never actually get passed to okay, so I have a question here. First read it. So I have a basic start question. Why is browser building like with CRA inferior to SSR? Wouldn't SR cause the website to be slower since we are waiting for the server to send build data? Website to be slower since we are waiting for a server to send build data. Actually, this is like a hard debate. Sometimes client-side rendering is actually better than server-side rendering, but there are some aspects that are server-side rendering is kind of superior to them, like SEO and some other stuff, but I don't want to go into this. I'm happy to chat about this after, or or if we have time after, because it's a little bit far from what we're talking about here. All right, thank you. All right, so we're saying that passing data between server and client components gets kind of weird because these functions that the server components never gets sent over the wire as functions. So you would need to find a way to keep this data somewhere and then send it over the wire as well. So it has to be something that's serializable. So from passing data from server to client component, you can actually import a client component into a server component because Next.js bundle is aware, and then it knows that this part is going to be rendered there, and then in the client actually renders it. So it sends a placeholder and then renders it when it's ready, or it does server-side rendering and just have it ready on the server. And then the data pass between the server component and the client component has to be serializable because, as I was just saying, this data is sent over the wire because this component actually never run on the client. But what about the other way around? Can you import a server component into a client component? Well, you can import a server component into a client component, but it's gonna, well, you can't, right? Because if you do, Next.js is gonna attempt to convert the server component into a client component, right? But if it can't, for example, if you use a server component, you're using something like a server feature like file system, or doing think await, or doing something that shouldn't happen on a normal React component, then it's going to complain and start throwing errors. But what about passing data down? Well, if you can't import them, then you definitely can't pass data down. But how would you do this? Well, you can do it through JSX passing. Like the children call. So you can actually have a server component that has a client component, and this client component accepts children, and then inside the children, you can actually still pass another server component. So you can do it. You don't have to even stick with children. You can pass it as a JSX directly as a different prop and then use it. But it's still, because as we were saying, that the JSX part is what gets sent over the wire. So it is available, the component itself or the function itself is not available. And yes, once you import the server component or client component, it will attempt to convert it into a client component or throw an error if it doesn't work. All right. Enough theoretical part. I want to show you something. You can still see my VS Code, right? Anyone? Can you still see my screen?
Yep, you can still see.
All right. So before we just look into code, I'm just gonna pause again and see if you have any questions. I know I throw a lot of information into you, so if you have a question, or if you feel like there's something that needs further explaining before we jump into code.
So how safe is server rendered server components? Sorry, like you can have keys in there and all that kind of stuff. We don't have to worry about it being exposed to the client.
Yes, that's a very good point. So if you create the Next.js, because it's like a full stack app, right? It handles environment keys in a different way. So you have keys that are only available in the server, that you can only use them in the server, and these keys never get sent over the wire, and you can use those for your sensitive data, your deployment tokens, your authentication tokens, and this kind of stuff. But for data that you would need on the client side, you can add like a prepend, something like next_public or something to this token, and then Next.js passes this to the client bundle, and then you can access it. That's what you were talking about, Boden, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's a great point. Right. So that's basically what we were talking about. I'm not, I have some stuff that I'm gonna show you, but let's start with the first thing. So if you create a new Next app, which you're gonna create using MBX create Next app, and then you're going to get this format, right? It's going to ask you a bunch of questions like, do you want to use the app directory or the pages router, because they are still both existing. I think pages might get deprecated later, but they are not yet. So you can still use the old approach or the pages approach, but we are talking about the app approach here. So, so you get this folder that should contain everything of your app. And then you get inside, what you bought inside is what you get. So the reserved keywords, as we were saying, is page and layout. And if you see page here, it's basically what gets rendered. So as we were saying, it's gonna be rendered like, let's go back here. Yes, so it gets rendered like this, right? So when you go here to the page, you would expect the root layout to be rendered, and then inside of it, the page with TSX are being rendered. So this is the home page. So that's this part. And this is the root layout, which basically that part. It just consists of the root layout text and a bunch of things that we're going to use later today. You can also export stuff like metadata and get static props and what you would expect normally if you want to use static site generation. But for now, it's this. But we talked about file called loading with TSX, right? And based on this, the loading is gets rendered there. Like there is a suspended boundary here, and then it gets on top of the page. So if this page is suspended, as this page is still loading, this fallback component should take over, which is pretty much the loading of the JS file. But right now it's not loading because there is nothing that we're waiting for. If we do this, and then I can actually show you that sync await thing, because this is a server component. One thing I didn't mention that every component in Next.js is a server component, unless you specify that it's a client component. So if I go ahead and save here and then go back, refreshing this page, yeah, you see that there is a loading and then the home page. And this is basically this part. I can like remove those. Just takes a second to re-render. Sometimes because it's cached, so I have to like hard refresh, and then you can see how it works. But you also have some other stuff like not found. Not found also gets rendered in the same exact place into the page if you go to something that doesn't exist. So if I go to like X, then I get this. And some other stuff, yeah. So we talked about layout, talked about page. We talked about there's error. These are error boundaries. If you start throwing errors, then you're going to show those. But these kind of, especially the global error one, the global error one works only on production. So for development, you actually still see the errors. And these mostly do not run for runtime errors, for like client-side runtime errors. They run if something went wrong while doing the page. All right, so what about nested routes? So we have the root layout, and then we have this black box that has homepage as the root layout. If you have a nested route, what you'd expect is that the layout of this nested route is going to be there, and then it's going to be a child outlet that has all the pages. But how do Next.js know where to put the data? If you go to a layout, which this is the root layout, so it has the HTML body and everything, that actually everything gets rendered. If you want to add anything, you would add there, but it has this as children. But we never pass those children ourselves. It's Next.js that passes them. And what are those children? If we go back here, you would see that the layout is being rendered there and everything gets rendered inside. These are the children. And here you can see there is a file called template. And template is a very interesting file. And actually pretty interesting to me to see if actually someone knows what's the difference between a layout and a template. Right. I'm gonna insert silence and no, and then I'm gonna.
I think
explain.
if I remember correctly, template re-renders the like kind of a layout on every visit.
Yes, mostly yes. So it renders not on every visit. Yes, it renders on every visit, of course, but it renders on every route segment. So if you have, as you were saying here, if we go back to that part, or where we're saying the route layout, here, as we said, the route layout part never gets re-rendered, right? The only part that outlets is the one that gets changed. And for the nested layout, it's the same thing. But Next.js created a different layer in the middle. It's a template. And it's exactly as Greg was saying, it gets rendered every time you switch pages. So if you have a different page that gets rendered into this outlet, the template itself gets re-rendered. And this allows you to pass dynamic data into the layout. But how does this work? If we go to where the template file, oh, we actually have it here. Yeah, all right. So we have an instant directory here that have a layout and a template. And then you have the first folder. So if you want to go to this first file or route segment, you would go to nested/first. And that's what we're going to do here. If I click on first here, you can see down the route is nested/first. And then what happens is there is a loading. And as you can actually see that this loading is exactly the same one as the one being rendered here, because it's actually the same one. So anything that gets down is being re-rendered, is being done the same way. And then you have the nested layout, nested template, and then first nested page. But how do you prove that a layout and template are kind of gets re-rendered? So I created this small thing that would allow you to make that just for demo purposes. But I added this use client to the component. This is what I was talking about when I mentioned that every component is a server component unless specified otherwise, and this is basically specifying otherwise. This is telling Next.js and React that this is actually a client component, right? But as we said before, server components never gets rendered twice. So if we go here and then I start doing this, that part, you will see that every time I refresh, it works. But if I switch between second and first, it doesn't get re-rendered. That's weird, but it's only because this is a server component. But if I say that this is a client component, this means that this is going to be rendered on the server and the client. And then switching between tabs or switching between segments actually going to change the thing. And if you do refresh here, you'd actually get an error that this is a server-side rendered error. And if you don't know what's this, I think you should read a little bit about content mismatch on the server and the client. It's not related to what we're talking here, but it's a very interesting error. All right, let's switch this back just to avoid having all of these errors. And then you have back the nested layout and the nested template. Okay. Yeah. Right. So that's the difference between a layout and a template. You can also do the same here, but it's not going to change. It's pretty much showing the same thing. Yeah, so actually you can see an error. There's a linting error here that shows that client component should not be in a sync component. So that this won't work. If I try to save here, I'm gonna get. Oh, it actually works, but I think it doesn't actually get work. Yeah, it works as a client component. So this happens, but nothing comes out of it. So to make this work, I would need to do this, and then it's gonna work properly. And this is just a demo to show you the loading effect that I was talking about earlier. All right, so we created the page for the first and second. And if I create like a file here that says something, is X. And then I'm going to try to go to first slash nested slash something. It's not going to work, but here it's going to actually work because I actually have dynamic routes here. So let's ignore this part for now. All right, so only a route that has the page duties is actually considered a route. Any other file that has any different name is totally ignored by the Next.js router, like this component called some link that I'm being used to style the link component is totally ignored from Next.js. So you can't really go to slash some link because it's not a page piece. All right, so first, second, and then we have this one, it's called some other number. And based on what we were saying earlier, that this is a dynamic param. So if you go to the page, you will see that actually expects a param called some other number, the exact name you have here. If you rename this to something else, it's going to be renaming this to also the same thing. And then you get the param and then render it. So showing this here, I'm having third as dynamic. If I click here, I go to third nested page. This is the dynamic one, exactly as what I'm typing here. And then you can do pretty much whatever you want with this, like fetch data or do something with that. But we have also this one for multiple numbers. If you have multiple params, and the type here gets back as an array of strings instead of just one parameter. So if I go to this, and this is, if you take a look at the URL, it's third slash fourth some link something, and then you can actually see it here. So this is an array of this and that. And the more you keep adding, it's still gonna behave the same exact way. But what if I do this? What if I do this? So I don't pass any. You would go back to the theme 404 page, which is here. So it keeps going back. Bless you. So it keeps going back to and going back in the tree until it finds a boundary and then stops at it. So now it's gonna found like a not found, and it's gonna keep going until it finds a not found and render it. Otherwise, it's gonna go to the default 404 page. But why this not picking up? We said it's an array, right? What if it's an empty array? If you wanna do this, then you would have to change this to that. Let's say there's Next.js that this is an optional route, an optional parameter. And then if you go here, you can expect this to be, I think, undefined, or I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure. So just gonna give it a try and then go here. And then actually see here, this is something mentioned try again error that we were showing here. So this is the component. There was an error that it went the same exact way. It kept going back into the boundaries until it found an error boundary and then rendered that. So if we change this, for example, then refresh, yeah, just to prove that this is the one being rendered. But what's actually the error here? Let's refresh that. Read the error, cannot write property of undefined. So interesting enough, if it's an empty thing, I actually expect it to be an empty array, but it's not. So this can be something like this. And then you would do like this, and then fresh, and it should work. So it's actually this one being rendered. All right, so that's basically it for the routing. Yeah, this is a dynamic zero params, and then we're gonna talk about the API once we come back to it. But this is how it works for the app directory. I didn't really go into how client component and server components work, but I'm gonna show you in a second while talking about the API. So I'm gonna go back here, and I'm gonna start this. And I'm also gonna give it a second if you have any questions or anything. before I keep moving. All right. You can also ask if there's something that I skipped or went like fast on, or there's something that needs further explaining. Please raise your hand and ask me. Otherwise, I'm just remind people.
I don't want to derail it though. Is that okay? So let me know if I'm trying to derail it. What does it look like when you go to publish? Does it create a new file for each entry within your tree?
That's actually a very, very interesting question, because it really relies on how you want to publish your site, right? There is, you can do static site generation, you can do hybrid, or you can do just the average thing. But if you do the average thing, the normal thing, then you would get what you would get as a page for every page and component for every component, and then it gets bundled down. So every component is going to still be the same component. So SSG, it's basically the same thing, but the actual component are being rendered into HTML files. So not HTML, it's a format that gets moved easy into HTML. So I'm using JSX or JSON, I'm not sure. But it's very reliant on what's your deployment or publishing strategy is.
Okay.
I'm not sure this answers your questions or not.
No, yeah, it was a bad question, because it's like, it depends how you want to deploy it. Yeah, cool. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. Like if you do static site generation, then you would get like everything, every query and everything in real time, and this where get static props come from. And if you don't know this, I think it's not covered here, but it's something that Next.js provide. And you have also a bunch of other stuff that gets done on static site generation. And then you will have the normal server-side rendering, which is basically your function just combined into JavaScript and it works, right? So I'm not 100% sure if you're going to get a file called page.tsx, but this component is going to be somewhere in your bundle. And of course, your server bundle is different. It's totally different from your client bundle based on what components are server components, what are client components, and yeah, the other way around.
Thank you.
All right, so API routes and server actions. So we're talking about reserved words, right? Reserved file names. One of them that we haven't talked about called routes.js or TS or TSX or yeah, it's never TSX, I think. Yeah, it's JavaScript or JS or TS. But if you do that, then you're gonna get an API endpoint created for you. Right. So this is just for the API routes. And what are server actions? Well, server actions are basically functions that run on the server. So they behave like API routes, but all the heavy lifting is happening for you. And then you can call this function directly on those client components and server components. And it gives you like TypeScript support out of the box. So if this function is returning a type, you can actually use it directly and then gets the TypeScript intelligence out of the box. All right, so back to code. So here I created a subfolder called something, which is a route segment, right? So if I put like a page of these extra, it's going to be slash something, and then it's going to just render it. But here I'm not having anything here. So if I go to slash something, then it's going to throw an error. That's going to go to the 404, right? But what's interesting is in these folder. So I named this some task to avoid the misconception of you have to name this API to put an route into it, because everywhere I looked, they name this directory API, but you don't have to. You can name it whatever you want. And then you would have this function, can have like a get function, a post function, a put function, yeah, whatever method you wanna use. But here I'm just using get, and then using physical async function, as you can see. I'm doing a fetch to a placeholder data, and then I'm getting the JSON out of this, and then I'm passing the data here. And here I'm creating some kind of TypeScript guard just to make sure that whatever is being passed is a to-do. So I'm doing this, but this is irrelevant to what you're saying. But what's happening here is that you're expecting to have an API endpoint that has something slash some path. So if I go to something slash some path, when you open this in a different tab, you'd actually get the API call response out. So this is an API endpoint. But how do you call this? If you go to uses API page, this is a page, right? So it's slash something slash uses API. So if you go to uses API here, you'll see that there is a to-do title and completed state. And if you go here, you would see that this is, because this is a server component, we can actually do asynchronous stuff in it. So I'm fetching the data and I'm fetching it with this. So the localhost slash 3000 something slash some path, I'm getting the data and here I'm expecting it to be the to-do type and then I'm using it directly. And that's how your average server component would look like. You would do all the fetching on those because most of the time it's cheaper to do the fetching on the server side than the client side. And as you can see, it's actually more syntax and it's easy, and you get like the loading and the error boundary and everything out of the box because this one waits for a second actually has the loading. Right. So that's basically how you would use it normally. But how do I do this from the client side? You said it's an average, a normal endpoint, so you can call it from pretty much everywhere. What if we have a client component? This is a client component because it says use client. Yes, correct. That's an excellent point. So this is actually not the fetch. This is the fetch of Next.js handles that in a different way. So it's not the native fetch one. So back to the client one. And here, because it's a client component, I can do pretty much everything that you would do normally in React. I can do like a lifecycle hook. I can use state. I can use effect, and I can do everything. This is client component. This is the average React component you would get. And here, because we are fetching data, so we're doing it like you would normally do it. So I'm creating a state, and then inside the use effect that runs once, I'm actually creating an IFI that this function fetches the same exact data, does exactly the same thing, and then I'm setting the state to be bad. And here I'm checking. But you see, actually, I have to check here because until the use effect run, which is pretty much the second render, and this gets triggered, which is also going to take a while, there is no to do. It's null. In the other one, there was no condition that this wasn't there, and there is an error to actually go to the error boundary. So every time this runs, you're going to have the to do. That's why you don't have to check if the to do is something different. So, but yeah, you would do it, and then you would have it rendered here, and that's what you are usually comfortable with because this is only the React component. But you can do that, right? Because client components, they can't be async. Well, it's gonna work, right? But it's not gonna give you what you expect. All right, so these are the routes. But in React 18, Next.js 13 point something, they have server component, server actions, which are stable in Next 14 now, so you can actually start using them. And what's a server action? It's basically a function that runs on the server, as I was saying. So this is the exact same thing. I want to open this beside that. So I want to do this here. So basically, this is a server action and this is route. And as you can see, this part is exactly the same because, yeah, that's not difference. And this is the part that's different. Here it's a get API call, but here you don't really care what kind of requests being sent. You can have like parameters sent to this function. It's a normal function, but the only difference is that it runs on the server. And how do you know it runs on the server? Because of that. So you can either put it there or put it inside the function itself. So if you have a function that only this function, the server function, the server action, you can put it inside. But otherwise, this is totally marked, the whole file is marked as a server action. And here I'm fetching data normally as I would do, and then I'm returning the data here without a response, without caring how this data is being sent over the wire. But it's guaranteed that this is going to run on the server. How do you use this? Is that this route uses server action, and if I go here and try to run it, it's exactly the same thing as this one. So if you go there, that's basically how it works. This is the client component, and here it's not calling any API calls, it's not using fetch, not doing anything. It's just call the function normally, and here it knows that the data is a to-do or not. This wasn't there before, right? Because it's just an API call, so you didn't know what you're gonna get. And you don't have to like do the .json part. You don't have to do anything. It's just a normal function, and then it gets rendered normally, right? So this is how you would do it on the client side, right? And this is how you would do it on the server side. So this is how the server action works. And as I was showing the difference between this and the route part. So if I do this, then you can actually see that this is different than that a little bit, because this is not a get, this is not a handler, this is just a function that runs on the server. And if you look at the data that's coming out of this, it's actually a to-do or null. And the good thing about this is that if you go back and call this in a client component or in a server component or whatever, you can actually get the type exactly. So you would get the same library experience as it's a normal function. But magically, that's run on the server. And you can use this for everywhere. You can use this as a callback. You can use this as a form submission handler. You can use this to do everything you would actually normally need. But it's not an API call anymore. It's just a function that's async and runs on the server. And then you can use the data to put it there. What you can also do is to run this on the server side, not only on component can run it also on server components. And with that, I wanted to show you how this actually works from the browser side. So for this one, if you go here and start refreshing, you see there is no API calls being sent. There's nothing being sent. And why that? It's because this is all happening on the server. If I take a look here, on side the use API, this is a server component, and the fetching is happening on the server component. So if I do find a log, and then I go there, if I take a look at the console, there is nothing being logged. But where should I find these logs? You can actually find it here in your system logs or in your server logs. But nothing gets sent here over the wire. So if I do this and go back, but what happens in the client side? The client side is an API call, of course, right? You're sending an API call over the wire and then to some path, which is basically, if I do this, it's basically the same exact thing we are working on. So this is what you would expect. But with server action, it's a different story because you can actually see here that this request, I think this is what's cached, so I can refresh. Yeah, because this one should be second. Yeah, so this is the data that gets sent back from that server. It's basically the same thing, but if I take a look at the actual raw response without formatting it, it's a weird format, right? And if you want to understand what this format and why does it look weird, then I think you should be reading more about the selective hydration and the streaming server-side rendering, which is a very nice feature that in React 18, but I'm not going to talk about it here because it's a big topic. But it's basically, this is being streamed over the wire, and then Next.js takes it and then pass it to, whatever, how it works. Right, I see a question here. From Stephanie, what happens if you use new date the data returned from the server action? We can try. I'm not sure what you're getting at, but we can try. So if I
I have this question because SSG, you know that you have that date generate on the build time, and now I'm not sure if that's going to be.
That's actually interesting. I'm not sure how this would work. But we are not using SSG here, so we won't be able to get it. I think it depends. Oh, all right. So yeah, I think I kind of know the answer to this. If you create a page here and create a function called get static params and static props, right? This function is the one that runs on SSG, and then it returns a bunch of props. Then you can use them here, right? You're aware of that?
Yes, for sure. So what I'm not sure is that changing from the API call from fetch, because if you use fetch, we know that we'll always get the date as the current. And now that when we are using that function, because you show us that if you refresh the page, it will not call the fetch. So that's the reason why I wonder what will be the response for the date. Is that going to be different? Is that going to be the right up to date one? Is that cache? Yeah.
Yes. So Next.js has a caching mechanism for both the API routes and I think for server actions as well that you can define. So you can there is a property that you can pass for routes. Just confirm this, and then I'm gonna go here. There is a property here. I think it's called dynamic something. And if you do this, then it's never getting cached. But if you do something or pass a different value, it doesn't also fetch. So you can actually have your fitting, your caching strategy or mechanism to tell it to Next.js, and you can also tell it on the fetch side. So you can define it here to tell it when to fetch and if it actually if it's static, if it's something that should be done on the build time. But I'm pretty sure for static site generation, it's a different story because for static site generation, nothing of those run, even these things. I think they don't run on build. I'm not 100% sure. If I go to here, this won't work, I think, but the get static props well for sure.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I think,
yeah. So I'm aware of the static site generation one. So that one, I'm pretty sure that if you put the date there on SSG, so it will render the date that is on that is generated from the build time. So because this new API, the not cloud function, the server action one is different from before when we do the fetch directly from server side. So that's the reason why that I'm not sure if there's some sort of the cache, the difference between the previous usage and this current usage. Is that going to change the date for a bit or caching it? But I think I get the idea is that it should be able to set it with a very dynamic based on that property.
Yep. This is basically what I was saying, that they have the same exact way as routes, but I'm not sure how this would work for SSG. But I'm gonna research it and come back to you after.
Sounds good.
We're a little bit over time, so if you have any questions, otherwise we're gonna call it a day.